This is House Planning Help, episode 214. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. And coming up today, my guest is Rob Wiggans from RMP Property. And I feel in some ways that we're going undercover today because we're looking at what we can learn from commercial property developers. And Rob actually worked for one of the big house builders in the UK as well. We'll find out more about that in just a second. So I'm wondering, do they just click their fingers and the land is there? Or is there something that we could be doing in the same manner that they are? So there's quite a lot of interesting stuff today. We know a self-builder's land is one of the big roadblocks. And I must do a quick thank you before we kick off the interview to Rob Bents, because he helped me out on this one. He's host of the Property Podcast along with Rob Dix. They run the Property Hub. They have a magazine. They have all sorts of different businesses going on these days. A booming empire. But I approached Rob to be a guest because I saw that he was getting more involved with the development side of things and buying land for the first few times. So I said, well, what have you learnt during this? And then he pointed to, it gets confusing, Rob Wiggans, saying, well, we've hired him specifically to help source our land. He's probably going to be the man to go and probe. So I think today what we're trying to get out of this is just to discover, is it exactly the same process as we go through, or are there any tips and tricks that we should know about? What are the advantages that they have as commercial developers? Do we have any advantages? I know that we can eat into our profits or go into negative equity. Yeah, don't go there. So let's have a chat with Rob Wiggans then. And I started by asking him to tell me a little bit about his background.
Myself, I actually come from a law background. I did law at university, and I never envisaged ending up in property or land. I actually did law as a good standing degree, and then when it was coming towards my end of my degree, I applied for graduate schemes, and the first one I applied for was actually for a house builder, Taylor Wimpey, and I got on their national graduate scheme and did 2 years with that. And it's like an apprenticeship, if you like. So I visited all the different offices throughout 2 years, lived in multiple locations, and worked in every department. It's like I say, it's like a 2-year apprenticeship whirlwind on housing development. And I ended up in strategic land to begin with, and did best part of 2 years with Taylor Wimpey, the department there, in the Northwest, and then came into property investment through Rob Bents and RMP Property.
And I'm quite interested in how they prep you up when you're going into housing. So what sort of things did you do in that graduate scheme? This is quite typical, isn't it? Sometimes if you're going to take over a business or a management role, that you'll go in different areas. So tell us about those. Yeah,
so you get given a timetable, if you like a 2-year timetable, so you kind of know where you're going to go and when. And I started off in production, and I physically worked out on site for 3 months in Yorkshire, working alongside the site manager, and then progressed into sales and working in the sales office across multiple sites. So working weekends and greeting customers and getting the sales experience. And then went into the office itself, the business unit for Yorkshire and Midlands, it was Leicester, and worked in finance. I worked in the technical department. And each time you go in a department, you kind of just shadow various people. And I've pretty much got to see every key role in a house building, in a housing developer, which was an amazing opportunity. It gave me a great standing and understanding of everything to do with house building right from the ground up, pardon the pun.
Did you choose the land route, or did that just happen almost by accident?
I was quite fortunate in that I chose it. There was an opening there, and I originally started out in strategic land down in Warwick in the office. They're working in more of a commercial role, and then progressed into strategic land in the Northwest, where I was physically going out and finding land.
How many people would they have in a team, or because it's split up amongst offices, does it end up not being that many in each? Or
it's a good question, and it depends on, obviously, each region is slightly smaller or larger than others, but typically a national house builder, the likes of Taylor Wimpey, a region would have, I'm just going to paint the picture in terms of numbers first, then go on to staff. So it would have in the region of about 15 live sites at any one time. Could drop down to 12, it might go up to 18, but the median is probably about 15. And then each site would obviously have subcontractors on there. It's only the management that are directly employed by Taylor Wimpey. It's all subcontracted out, the various trades. So you've got 15 site managers there across the sites. And then in the actual office, you probably have in the region of 30 to 40 staff. If you include sales staff as well, obviously working out in the sales offices across there, you probably go up to about 50. So yeah, it's not, an army of hundreds by any stretch. It's more management and professional roles that are directly employed by Taylor Wimpey. Then when it comes to the trades, physical building of the houses, that's subcontracted out. And then obviously you could go into the hundreds if you included them.
Let's talk specifically land then from here on in. So who makes up a land team?
A land team is very small. So in a typical office, you'd have the immediate land guys. They buy land that's oven ready, as it's known in the industry. So that's sites with a physical planning ticket. You probably have 2 to 3 land managers, and then the land director, an estimator as well, who works alongside the land department. So about 5 in the immediate land team tops, and then you would have 2 to 3 in strategic land, 3 strategic land managers. So a team would be made up of probably definitely no more than 10 in any region.
Those names are great, but they actually mean very little to me. Estimator, what did that one do? Maybe you can go through these roles and what these people would be doing.
Sure. So a land manager would have the relationship with the agent and they physically negotiate the deal and assess the viability of a deal. An estimator runs the numbers, actually, spends 99% of his or her time, physically running the numbers on spreadsheets, and all they're doing in simple terms is making sure that land is viable. And what I mean by viable is there's enough profit in it, and there's enough in it for the landowner, and that the build costs are correct. I'm digressing here, but I'll explain just the very broad basics of land value. So on a site, you have the total sales cost of all your houses. So the total revenue, GDV, as it's called, gross development value, and then less all your physical build costs, and then less developers' profit, which is, depending on the site, is probably anything from gross profit 20 to 30%. And then the last portion goes to the landowner. So if you've got a site that's way too high in build costs and there's nothing in it for the landowner, then it's what you call an unviable site, because clearly a landowner is not going to sell for nothing. So yeah, that's just a quick whirlwind on land value.
And how do they make sure then that they've always got enough land to build their houses, or does it just ebb and flow?
Taylor Wimpey it saw the light with strategic land before most of the major house builders. With most house builders now, because they've all cottoned onto the idea, it's a 2-prong attack. So you have an immediate land bank and you have a strategic land bank. So what I mean by immediate is land they own, that's got planning, that's good to go. Literally, they're ready to go and put the spade in the ground. And that comes from most of the time the agents that cast it across all the national developers. Then you have strategic land. And what I mean by that is they don't own the land most of the time, a large percent. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't. And that is land that's no planning. It's just a green field, or brown field could be, that they're progressing through the planning system and promoting it for development. And that's all long-term stuff that might not come forward for 10, 20, 30 years. And the reason that they can progress it and don't own it is because they have what they call an option agreement. And that option agreement is with the landowner. And to give you a picture of what an option agreement might look like, so I'm a farmer that owns these 100 acres of fields, and Mr. Developer knocks on the door and says, "Oh, hi, I think your site's great for housing. We'll promote it through the planning system for you, but it might not happen tomorrow. It'll happen in 10, 15 years' time. So what we'll do, we'll give you an initial payment of £10,000. Great, good few holidays there. Then in 10 years' time, if we haven't progressed and it's not got planning, we'll give you another 10 years' time. Give you another £10,000 for a further 10 years. So it'll look like £10,000 up front for 10 years, then £10,000 again for another 10, then £10,000 again for another 10. And what they'll say is if we're successful in planning, we'll get a discount off land value. So once we come to agree the land, that price, once it's got planning, we'll get a 20% discount off the site because of the significant cost involved with promoting it through the system, which is hundreds of thousands. Now, the great thing about it is it's a win-win for everyone. So landowner does nothing and sits back and lets the developer do all the work at the developer's cost. Developer takes the risk, which the likes of Taylor Wimpey, a few £100,000 is a drop in the ocean. But the end game for the developers, they get 20% off the land value, which is a significant amount of money if you're looking at a 100-acre site. So developer gets huge value for some risk, but not great because they're not physically buying the site until they have planning. And Mr. Farmer gets several million in the bank once they get planning for nothing out of his back pocket. So yeah, that's a quick whirlwind on strategic land.
Now, there's no danger here of the farmer thinking, oh, I'm going to be able to sell my land, and then actually the planning is, you're focused somewhere else. You can't keep your eye on sorting out the planning and getting it through because there's also no rush, is there?
That's a great point. So it all depends when you come to agree the option agreement. Most of the time, the farmer will have an agent who advises them. So, most developers always say it's best for the landowner to get an agent so then they can be seen to be taking advantage of them, if you know what I mean. So in the option agreement, we'll agree an amount of time to update them. So we'll say, we'll give you an update every 6 months or every 12 months. And that will correspond with the position of the local plan. So the big opportunity that developers have of getting land for development, or to be included in the local plan to be brought forward for residential, it might be that the local plan is going to come forward in 3 to 4 years' time. So there's a great initial 4-year window to bring it forward for development. Then that local plan might last 10 years. And so then if they don't succeed initially, it's going to be a good few years away until they succeed again. So right up front, a developer would always approach landowners that's got a good short to medium term opportunity. And should they miss the first time, they know that they've got another go in terms of the structure of the option agreement. Because when I was out looking for land, from a long-term perspective, I would look at sites where local plans have an opening coming forward in the next 3 to 5 years, say, where we can promote it. And that'll be submitting representations to the consultation that any local plan would have.
Just sticking with that overriding plan then, are you always going into land transactions once that's in place, or are you hedging your bets? How does that work?
From an immediate land perspective or strategic land perspective, because on both sides there's deals going all the time. So we're always looking for immediate land, we're always looking for strategic land. It's quite a fine balance between the two. But to give you an idea on percentages of strategic against immediate, and a national developer, big national developer might have in the short to medium term, 50% of their sites coming from strategic land and 50% coming from immediate. And that's growing greater on the strategic side, 40, 50, 60% for a lot of house builders, because they're seeing it as an opportunity to gain much more value rather than purchase it oven ready where there's not as much value.
And just finally, before we try and relate this all back to self-builders, are you on a strategic basis really looking for things that are on the edge of current dwellings, developments? It's just, we've got one in our neighbouring town where they're building 3,000 homes, but it completes the circle of the town.
Yeah, that's right. So when you're looking for strategic land, you are looking at edge of settlements that are really sustainable. So To give you a great example of how we look for strategic land, say a new link road is announced in a local area, then all the land coming off that immediately becomes very sustainable and very well connected naturally through it being a link road. So land off that will generate both employment land and housing. So you'll always see an announcement when a new link road or bypass is announced. Oh, this will mean that X amount of pounds will be generated in commercial sites coming forward and new jobs, and also X amount of houses. So we're always following where the growth is going in terms of infrastructure. Or it might be a new railway station, or it might be a new railway line or tram network where sustainability is just become very prominent in that area, or it's about to be. But as with everything, that road might take 5 years to be built, or HS2, for example, is going to unlock a lot of land naturally through the stations. So that's like the path we follow. So it's both edge of settlements, but the thing about edge of settlements is you've got to be careful about bringing two settlements together. So that can't, without going too deep into planning policy, you can't bring two settlements together or merge two settlements, as it's called. It's all about sustainability, fundamentally.
You mentioned that at one point you were out there looking for the land. So let's spend the last part of this. We've done episodes before on land. We're aware of the due diligence. And although this cannot be stressed enough, all of these sorts of things, what about that initial stage of actually finding something that you think is good? How are you doing that?
Sure. So the thing about land is it's about the early bird catches the worm, and that's all built around the strength of your network. So it isn't what you know, really, it's who you know. And that way you find out about land opportunities very quickly, because in any area, so in the Northwest, for example, where I base myself, the land and planning network of professionals is very, very small. Everyone knows everyone. So when a good land opportunity comes around, it's very quickly passed around, and everyone knows about it. So it's about being in that network fundamentally. And then when I say early bird catches the worm, a great example is when I monitor planning applications, and when a site is notified that it's got a planning decision granted, I would approach the landowner. So the first site I bought for RMP was exactly that. I approached the landowner once he got planning. Again, early bird catches the worm.
Okay, let's look at this for a second, because this is interesting. I tried this when I was looking for land. I know we're much further down the scale, and in some respects, okay, you're going to get doors slammed in your face. But I felt like if I were at the other end, opening that door, I'd be saying, well, this is interesting. And then I would put it on the market. I wouldn't deal with someone who's come and knocked at the door.
Yeah. It's a great point. I mean, at the end of the day, the landowner wants maximum value for it. If you're able to demonstrate speed and you're able to do the transaction, and that you are providing a good land value and can demonstrate that, then you are in with the chance of being the first person through the door, because by putting it to market, you've more cost. A large percentage of the time you'll have agents' fees to pay, which is typically anything from 1% to 3%. So you're losing 1-3% of your land value by bringing it to the market. So by doing it off the market, you've met someone, you've not done any work, and he's willing to move quickly, job done. So there's a big opportunity there, especially if it's, or for any size site really. But I guess it's just a case of being persistent. Even if you did get a door slam in your face, maybe don't give up, write them another letter. It's about being persistent and having the right positive mindset. Mindset is a big part. So just making sure you don't give up.
So there's a sales mentality almost, isn't there?
There is. Yeah. You won't get anywhere by just, the land won't come to you. It's about looking where people might not always look and being a bit quirky about your trail of thought. Planning applications is a big one. It's in the public domain. On every single local authority has got their own planning portal. Then there's other ways you can do it. By agent network is, like I just touched on network, but agents is a big one. Get to know all your local land agents. There is some
How do we do that? Because again, this is the sort of thing that agents, I'm sure I Googled that. I tried to come up with people who might help me with my land search, and I failed on this one. I know what we're going to get to in a minute. You're going to say, don't buy anything that's advertised on the market. And that's what we ended up doing.
Yeah, that's it's a good point. I mean, so did you say you Googled and rang up and tried to create the relationship and you didn't succeed on that? I think that might be that moment in time and what's available in that particular area is a little guess. But again, persistent with that one.
I'm not sure I even understand that process. So how do you find an agent reputable? In
terms of finding an agent, I mean, it's a bit hard for me to answer that because...
it's network, isn't it? You're going to tell me...
because I automatically had a network built around me when I joined a national developer, so maybe I've had an easy ride of that. But every local area will have a local RICS surveyor, because when I say agent, I don't mean your typical high street agent, which you will get land through them, but local land agents, surveyors that specialise in land is what you want. So it's about establishing a relationship with them. I can't give any examples because it's just dependent on that particular area.
What about this then? Agents, do you think they'll deal with us? We're small fish, really.
Yes, a good point. So the reason an agent's typical fee structure is percentage of value. So if you're buying a piece of land for 100 grand and they're getting 2%, 3%, but then the amount of land that's worth 5 million and they're getting the same percentage, you can understand where their interest lies. That's one potential. But at the end of the day, it's a fee opportunity. So if they're going to get paid, they should be driven by it.
What are your other routes then? We've talked about network, we've talked about agents.
So there's other ways. So auctions is a big one. So people always say, and it's true, when anything goes to auction, from a land property perspective, there's always something wrong. But that doesn't mean it's automatically not an opportunity you should pursue, because there's huge value there. It might be that the landowner wants a quick sale and can't be bothered with putting it to market. The circumstance means they need a quick sale. So there might not be anything too much wrong with it. But if there is something wrong with it, can you solve it? Can you get the value? Because you're not going to pay full value for it with it being at auction. And it might be you strike lucky that day and no one else is interested in it and you get a bargain. Or if a site doesn't sell at auction, and this is another way I've bought land, you like a site, but there's a few unknowns and you haven't got the time to do the due diligence. You wait, you watch the auction. If it doesn't sell, pick up the phone, say you're interested, and then buy yourself some time to do the due diligence, which is what I did again, and purchase the site through that way. So it's just about, can you solve the problem with an auction? And then the other way is similar to monitoring planning applications. But if you spot a piece of land, go on land registry and set up an account, which is pretty straightforward to do. And you can find out the landowner for as little as £3, contact them and say, hey, I really like your land. Are you interested in selling it? And that's a very basic way of door knocking and going direct for that piece of land you've seen that you really like. In simple terms, don't see any barriers. Try and think outside the box. How can you get in contact with people for the land that you want?
And planning applications too can be useful. I didn't go down this route in a big way, but how would you start down that process of assessing good ones over bad ones?
Yeah, and this is where due diligence comes in and having the right team around you. So when you see a planning application will always have a load of documents with it on the portal, plans, surveys, etc. Planning applications vary in quality quite dramatically. And I guess it's just about being a bit of detective and seeing what may be wrong with it. It's quite, in terms of one single plot of land, obviously the due diligence is not going to be as huge as it would be on a large site. But things I would look for is access, ground conditions, ecology, Drainage, so can the site drain? Service connections, where's the nearest service connection if it's quite detached from that particular area? So if you're looking in a rural plot of land, it might be that the nearest water connection is quarter of a mile down the road and you've got to pay to connect into that network. So there's a lot of things to consider that on the face of it might look all great. It's a nice idyllic flat piece of land, but people always say all the issues are below the ground, not above it, when it comes to land, and it's very true. It's about trying to uncover the unknowns.
I feel like we've got a round two here, talking about due diligence and perhaps planning mixed into this. Would you fancy coming back another time?
Yeah,
somewhere down the road? Because I think we could go another half an hour at least on this.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree, because due diligence is such a huge thing, and very costly mistakes can be made if you don't do it and you buy land at a whim. So I'm more than happy to discuss that another time.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we've obviously talked about it before, but I think your angle is slightly different to how we look at things as a self-builder. So although we have talked about it, I'm sure you're going to shed some new light, and I can throw some things at you as well, like I've done today. Maybe just finally, are there any ninja tips that you think might help us on this small scale as self-builders? I don't know, maybe nothing comes to mind. Maybe we've already talked about them.
Key tips. So I think I touched on due diligence, but I'm just going to relate to it very slightly. Trust your gut. And it sounds a bit daft to say that, because you can say that in any context. But in land and property investment, I've found when you think to yourself, something not right here, and you don't know what it is, and if you don't know and you still have that feeling, don't do it. Trust your gut is probably one of the biggest pieces of advice I could recommend. And grow your team before you go into it. So make sure, like, key team members, whether you're building one plot or 100, is a good lawyer. And I don't mean your typical conveyancing lawyer that does your house. I mean someone who works in land conveyancing day in, day out, and you've got recommended from someone and is highly regarded. You can't be a good land lawyer, because the transactions I've done, I've uncovered some big things from a legal perspective by having a good lawyer. Secondly, planning consultant is a big one, or architect. Architects do planning applications, but I would always have a planning consultant on board, and there's plenty of them, plenty of good ones, and they're not too hard to find. Architect is a big one, and an agent as well to bring you your land. So they're the key players I would say you need, whether you're building one plot or 100, because they can, albeit you'll pay them all a fee, you could save yourself some significant headache in the future by having them around you. Also, and you might, in terms of self-build, obviously you're building it to live in yourself more often than not, have a clear exit plan. So what's going to happen when you get planning? How are you going to build out is a big one. So don't just say, I'll get planning and deal with the build later. Start preparing that.
Our exit plan is to sit happily in our houses and enjoy it, and not think, oh my goodness, how much money have we poured into this?
So a great thing to say about exit plan is, I know you'll live in it, but to touch on exit plan is, make sure you start engaging with reviewing build costs right away and getting a good flavour of cost before you spend too much money. So that's a big one. But if you live it yourself or you're going to sell up, exit plan is a big one. Don't just say, I'll deal with that later, and do the planning first. And finally, know when to bin it is a big one as well. So what I mean by that, if you really like an opportunity and you're to and fro with no negotiation, or there's something not right about the site, something's not quite working, don't spend months and months and months and months, or however length of time, still keeping at it, because know when to bin it, know that enough is enough now, let's move on. Because with land, there is always plenty of opportunities around the corner if you look in the right places. So don't waste too much time on an opportunity that won't come off.
Rob, been a really good chat today. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thank you, Ben.
Head online to take a look at the show notes for this one. You'll find them at houseplanninghelp.com/214, where you can review all the main information again. We've got that summary for you there. Perhaps you have a comment or a question, you can scroll down to the bottom of the show notes and fire away, or tap us up on social media. We'll link you across to RMP Property and point to Rob on Twitter, all at houseplanninghelp.com/214. Let's finish up on a hub update. What's going down for our members? Well, we've got a new course on developing house designs, and we dig into the process here, particularly if you're going down the contractor route. What's important? Space. That's one of them, isn't it? And as you go through the project, you discover you need to get more and more in tune with space and what spaces you've created, but it would definitely be a huge advantage if you felt you had that superpower before you even began. So we talk about that. We look at the different documents that you'll be dealing with, give you an overview of the process and technical design, which you're probably not going to be doing yourself. So all of that in our latest course. Our in-depth video case study, the Buckinghamshire Passive House story, continues. We've got a video now on the plumbing that's going in as part of the first fix. They're also putting sound insulation in the stud walls, then plasterboarding on top of that, so you can see that process. And it's weird to think that we've only got a few more episodes of that, and then we're either going to be going back to Long Barrow because there's some activity going on there again. I know it's been a big interlude for Alex Baines. I've had numerous chats with him, and the dates have moved, but I know that he's bought windows for Long Barrow and they're about to get back up and running again. So really excited for him. And there's also all this footage that we've been filming of my own project that I want to share with you as well in the hub. So we've got that coming up. I'm not sure. We might do a bit of mix and match that will dart from each project. But our in-depth video case study is very much focused on the decision making and how you can get benefit of just going on site without actually going on site. You can just consume our high quality videos. In the conference call this month, we're chatting to Will Kirkman from Eco Merchant. So he's our special guest. We're going to quiz him on materials, particularly if you're thinking about embodied energy and what's the best build system. He's extremely passionate. Can you actually go down this route of thinking, well, I'm going to get everything as eco as possible, because we know that the costs then go up. So loads of good stuff in the hub. If you haven't investigated it and you're not a member, well, check out houseplanninghelp.com/join. That's it for another day. Thank you so much for being there. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.